My husband said he had to work late, but his office was dark when I drove by. I called and asked, "How's work?" He said, "Busy, can't talk." But I heard a girl's voice in the background. I checked his car's GPS and what I saw almost stopped my heart. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. Our life, to the outside world, was a perfectly executed event. I should know, I was the one who had planned it. From our meticulously renovated Craftsman in Virginia Highland, to the curated art on the walls and the synchronized calendars that governed our days, every detail was a testament to my life's work. Flawless execution. As the owner of one of Atlanta's most sought-after event planning businesses, my talent was creating beautiful, seamless experiences. My marriage to Derek was my masterpiece. He was the charismatic dreamer, the brilliant architect with a smile that could disarm a hostile zoning board, and a vision that could reshape the city skyline. I was the foundation, the scaffolding, the one who translated his beautiful, chaotic dreams into concrete, manageable reality. He envisioned the magnificent structure. I handled the permits, the budgets, and the logistics. We were a power couple, a perfect synergy of art and engineering, and I loved him with a quiet, fierce, and all-consuming devotion. But there was a crack in our perfect foundation, a single critical element missing from our otherwise flawless blueprint: a child. For 5 long, brutal years, our life had been secretly governed by another, more painful schedule: the unforgiving timetable of infertility. We had navigated a heartbreaking landscape of ovulation charts, hormonal injections, and devastating clinical disappointments. Each negative pregnancy test, each failed IVF cycle, was a small, silent demolition of the future we were trying so desperately to build. It was a quiet, private grief, a strain on our marriage that we never acknowledged aloud. We were a team, and our project was to remain strong, to present a united, successful front to the world. But I saw the toll it was taking on Derek, the shadow of disappointment that sometimes flickered in his eyes, the forced brightness of his smile when a friend announced a pregnancy. His dream was to be a father, and my body, the one part of my life I could not plan, could not control, was failing to deliver on his vision. Into this quiet, tense landscape lived my sister Maya. She occupied the beautifully converted carriage house at the back of our property, a space we had renovated for her when she decided to pursue her art career full-time. She was my opposite in every way. A free spirit, a bohemian beauty who lived in a world of chaotic creative splendor. Where my life was a series of neat, orderly spreadsheets, hers was a canvas spattered with paint and passion. I loved her, of course, but our relationship was complicated. I was the older, successful sister, the one who had always taken care of things. She was the struggling artist, the beautiful, slightly lost soul who had always lived in my shadow. We supported her financially. The guest house was rent-free, and I quietly paid for her art supplies and covered her bills when she was between commissions. It was an act of love, of sisterly duty, but I often felt her gratitude was tinged with a quiet, sharp resentment. She depended on the very stability she so openly disdained, and it created a subtle, unspoken tension between us, a debt that was never acknowledged and never seemed to shrink. Still, we were a family, the 3 of us, a tight, if slightly dysfunctional unit. I believed in us. I believed in my marriage. I believed that with enough planning, enough love, enough sheer force of will, I could eventually execute the one event that had so far eluded me, the creation of our own perfect family. I just needed to keep all the pieces in place, to manage all the variables, to ensure the foundation remained strong. I had no idea that one of the core components of my structure was already rotten, and that the entire beautiful edifice was on the verge of a catastrophic collapse. The call came just after 7 on a Tuesday evening. I was in my home office, a sanctuary of calm, organized efficiency, putting the final touches on a seating chart for a governor's fundraising gala. The logistics were a complex political minefield, but this was my element. I thrived on creating order out of chaos. Derek's name flashed on my phone screen. I smiled, a genuine warm smile of a woman who still, after 12 years of marriage, felt a small, happy jolt at the sight of her husband's name. "Hey you," I said, my voice full of the easy affection of our life together. I was just about to start prepping dinner. "I'm making your favorite shrimp and grits." "Jazz, hey," his voice on the other end was strained, tired. "Listen, something's come up. Don't wait up for me." "Oh no," I said, my event planner brain immediately kicking into problem-solving mode. Is it the Harrison project? Did the city council come back with more revisions? Worse, he sighed, and the sound was so full of a believable bone-deep weariness that my heart went out to him. The final renders for the Midtown Tower proposal are corrupt. The whole file. We've got the presentation to the board at 9 a.m. tomorrow. It's a catastrophe. Me and the junior team, we're going to have to pull an all-nighter rebuild the whole thing from the ground up. The Midtown Tower was his baby. It was a massive career-making project. A skyscraper that would permanently alter the Atlanta skyline. He had been living and breathing it for months. A setback like this, the night before the final presentation, would be devastating. Oh, Derek. I'm so sorry, I said, my voice full of genuine sympathy. That's awful. Is there anything I can do? Can I bring you guys anything? No, he said, his voice rushed. We're fine. We'll just order in some pizzas. It's going to be a long, ugly night. You just get some rest. I'll probably just crash on the couch in my office. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, baby, I said softly. I love you. Good luck. Love you too, he said, and hung up. I sat there for a moment, staring at the intricate seating chart, but my mind was with him, in that high-rise office downtown, facing a mountain of stress and work. I felt a surge of love and admiration for him, for his passion, for his dedication. This was the man I had married, the brilliant, ambitious architect who poured his entire soul into his work. And then, the planner in me, the caretaker, the woman whose entire life was about anticipating needs and providing solutions, kicked in. Pizzas and vending machine coffee were not going to get him through a night like this. He needed real fuel. He needed support. He needed his wife. A new plan formed in my mind, a small, loving logistical operation. I went into the kitchen and packed up the shrimp and grits I had been preparing, putting it into insulated containers to keep it warm. I brewed a fresh, strong pot of his favorite dark roast coffee and filled a large thermos. I added a couple of energy bars and a bottle of water. It was a care package, a tangible expression of my love and support. I scribbled a quick note for Maya, who was out at an art class, and left it on the kitchen counter. Derek's stuck at the office all night with a work emergency. Dropping off some food for him. Back soon. Love, Jay. As I drove through the glittering, vibrant streets of Atlanta, the city lights a dazzling, familiar tapestry, I felt a deep sense of purpose. This was what it meant to be a partner. To show up. To be the quiet, steady support system that allows the dreamer to dream. He thought he was in it alone, but he wasn't. I was on my way. I was bringing him a little piece of home, a little bit of my love, to help him through his long, dark night. The irony of that thought would not hit me until much, much later. The downtown skyline of Atlanta at night is a breathtaking sight, a forest of light and steel that always filled me with a sense of pride and possibility. Derek's firm occupied the top 3 floors of one of the newest, most prestigious towers on Peachtree Street. As I pulled onto the street, I looked up, my eyes scanning the gleaming glass facade for the familiar warm glow of his corner office on the 15th floor. And that's when the first small discordant note of wrongness struck me. The building was a dark, silent monolith. Not just his floor, but the entire soaring structure was black, save for a few stray lights in what looked like a janitorial closet. The vibrant, bustling hub of architectural innovation where my husband was supposedly leading a team in a frantic all-night work session was as quiet and as empty as a tomb. I slowed the car, a cold knot of confusion forming in the pit of my stomach. Maybe I had the floor wrong. No, I had been to his office 100 times. 15th floor, southeast corner. A prime piece of real estate with a panoramic view of the city, a view he was so proud of, and it was completely undeniably dark. I pulled the car over a block away, parking in the shadow of an older, less glamorous building. I just sat there, the insulated bag of food growing cold on the passenger seat, my mind racing, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe they had moved to a different part of the building, a conference room. Maybe the lights were on a sensor and had timed out. The rationalizations felt thin, flimsy, like architectural sketches on tracing paper. My hand, trembling slightly, reached for my phone. The plan had been a surprise, a loving gesture, but now, I needed a confirmation. I needed to hear his voice, and know that there was a simple logical explanation for the dark, empty building that was staring back at me like a dead, hollow eye. I pressed his contact number. It rang once, twice. On the third ring he answered, his voice a sharp, breathless and deeply annoyed. Hello? Hey baby, I said, forcing my own voice to be light, casual, a perfect imitation of a wife just calling to check in. It's me. How's work? There was a pause. A beat of silence that felt a full second too long. Jazz. I told you I was busy, he said, his voice a harsh, frustrated whisper. I can't talk right now. We're in the middle of it. We're in the middle of it. But the office was dark. The building was empty. The lie was so bald, so blatant, that it took my breath away. He was not just mistaken, he was actively, consciously lying to me. Right now, I just wanted to see if you needed anything, I said, my voice now a little strained, the casual performance becoming harder to maintain. No, I'm fine, he snapped. Just busy. Really busy, I have to go. And then just before he hung up, I heard it. A sound from his end of the line, in the background of his busy office. It was a sound that was as clear and as unmistakable as a bell in a silent room. It was a giggle. A young woman's giggle. It was light, musical and carefree, and it was familiar. It was a sound I had heard 1,000 times before in my own home, in my own garden. It was a sound that was so deeply intimately known to me, that my brain registered it before my heart could begin to process the monstrous, impossible implications. Derek. Who was that? I asked, my voice suddenly sharp, the question a reflex. No one, he said, his voice now full of a frantic, desperate haste. It's just the TV on in the background. Look, I gotta go, I'll call you tomorrow. And the line went dead. I sat there in the dark, in the silent cocoon of my car, the phone still pressed to my ear, the TV in the background. The lie was so clumsy, so insulting in its lack of effort. He hadn't even tried to make it believable. The giggle. It echoed in my mind, a cheerful, innocent sound that was now laced with a sinister, mocking quality. It was a sound I knew as well as my own name. But it couldn't be. It was impossible. My mind was playing tricks on me. My suspicion was making me paranoid. My heart was pounding, a wild, frantic drumbeat against my ribs. My husband was not at work. He was somewhere else, and he was with a woman whose laugh was so familiar that it had sent a shockwave of pure cold dread through my entire being. The question was no longer if he was lying. The question was, where was he, and who was he with? And in the cold, clear and terrifying logic of that moment, I knew there was a way to find out. A simple, modern and deeply invasive way to find the truth he was so desperately trying to hide. The city lights, which had seemed so beautiful and promising just a few minutes ago, now felt alien and menacing. They blurred and swam before my eyes, a dizzying, mocking testament to a world that was suddenly terrifyingly out of focus. I sat in my parked car, the silence a roaring abyss, the thermos of coffee on the passenger seat a sad, pathetic monument to my own naivete. My mind was a chaotic war zone. One part of me, the loving, trusting wife of 12 years, was desperately trying to find a rational explanation. It was a misunderstanding. He was at a different office, a satellite location I didn't know about. The giggle was a colleague, a junior architect, and his frantic haste was just the stress of the deadline. I was being crazy. I was being the paranoid, insecure wife that I had always prided myself on not being. But the other part of me, the event planner, the woman whose entire career was built on logistics, on facts, on seeing the patterns that others missed, knew that the data did not add up. The dark office, the clumsy lie about the TV, the chillingly familiar sound of that giggle. It was a series of discordant notes that pointed to a conclusion so ugly and so devastating that my heart refused to even consider it. I had to know. The uncertainty was a poison, and it was spreading through me with a terrifying speed. With a hand that trembled so violently I could barely control it, I picked up my phone. I scrolled through the pages of apps, my thumb hovering for a moment over his contact photo. A picture of us in happier times, smiling on a beach in the Caribbean. I swiped past it. I found the app I was looking for, an app I had insisted we both install years ago for safety reasons. It was the Find My Car app, a feature linked to the sophisticated GPS systems in both our vehicles. We had used it a handful of times, usually to find our car in a crowded airport parking garage. It was a tool of convenience. Tonight it was about to become a weapon of terrible, intimate discovery. I opened the app. Our two cars were represented by small, pulsing blue dots on a map of the city. My dot was right where it should be, a stationary beacon on a side street off Peachtree. I took a deep, shuddering breath, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I tapped the icon for Derek's car, the sleek, new SUV he was so proud of. I braced myself. I prepared my heart for what I was almost certain I would see. I expected the blue dot to be in a residential neighborhood in a different part of the city, parked in front of a house I didn't recognize. I expected it to be at a high-end hotel downtown, a place for a clandestine anonymous rendezvous. I expected the clear, unambiguous and heartbreaking proof of a simple sordid affair. The map loaded, the blue dot representing Derek's car appeared, and what I saw almost stopped my heart. It was not in a residential neighborhood. It was not at a hotel. The pin was located in Buckhead, the city's most affluent and exclusive district, but it was in a commercial area, a quiet, discreet street, lined with low-rise professional buildings. It was parked in the parking lot of a place I knew, a place we had talked about, researched, even considered visiting years ago, in the early days of our fertility struggles. The name of the building, which I immediately looked up on my phone's map to be absolutely certain, was a punch to the gut. The Peters Fertility and Women's Wellness Clinic. A fertility clinic. At 9 o'clock at night. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The air left my lungs in a silent, whooshing rush. I couldn't breathe. 1,000 frantic, nonsensical possibilities exploded in my mind. Was he sick? Was he getting tests done? Was this a secret he was keeping from me to spare me more pain, as my sister's voice would suggest in a few hours? Was he planning some kind of grand, impossible surprise? But none of it made sense. The secrecy, the lie about work, and the giggle, the light, musical and terrifyingly familiar giggle of a young woman. What did a fertility clinic have to do with a secret woman? My mind, my logical, analytical, event planner's mind, began to connect the dots in a pattern that was so monstrous, so unthinkable, that I could not even begin to form the words for it. The pieces were all there, scattered on the table, but they formed a picture of a betrayal so profound and so twisted that my very soul recoiled from it. I stared at the glowing blue dot on the screen of my phone, at that single terrible point on the map that had just vaporized the entire, carefully drawn blueprint of my life. The feeling was not the hot, sharp pain of being cheated on. It was the cold, terrifying vertigo of a woman who has just realized that the very ground beneath her feet is not solid, that the life she had so meticulously built was nothing more than a beautiful, elaborate, and now completely collapsed illusion. I didn't pass out. I wished I could have. Instead, I just sat there in the darkness, my heart not breaking, but simply stopping, a silent, frozen witness to the beginning of the end of my world. The drive home was a fugue state. I don't remember the traffic, the turns, the familiar route back to my own quiet, tree-lined street. My mind was a maelstrom of confusion, hurt, and a terror so profound it had no name. The glowing blue dot on the map of the Peters Clinic was burned into my memory, a single, inexplicable point of pain around which my entire reality was now chaotically orbiting. I stumbled into my house, the insulated bag of cold food still in my hand, a sad, pathetic relic from a life that had existed only an hour ago. The house was quiet, the air still and expectant. Maya was in the kitchen, sketching in a charcoal pad at the large central island, a glass of wine at her elbow. She looked up as I entered, her beautiful bohemian face immediately clouding with concern at the sight of my own. I must have looked like a ghost. "Jose, what's wrong?" she asked, putting her sketchbook down. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Did something happen with Derek?" And then, I broke the carefully constructed walls of my composure. The professional, unflappable facade of the event planner who could handle any crisis crumbled into dust. The story tumbled out of me, a messy, incoherent torrent of pain and confusion. The dark office, the lie about work, the giggle in the background, and the final incomprehensible discovery. The GPS pin at the fertility clinic. A fertility clinic, Maya? I wept, sinking into a chair at the island, the bag of food falling to the floor with a dull thud. What was he doing at a fertility clinic at 9 o'clock at night? With another woman? Maya was by my side in an instant. She wrapped her arms around my shaking shoulders, her embrace a familiar, comforting weight. "Oh, Jas," she murmured, her voice a soft, soothing balm. "I'm so sorry. That's so weird. But are you sure? Are you sure you heard another woman?" "I heard her, Maya," I insisted, my voice thick with tears. "I heard her laugh, and it was so familiar." Maya was silent for a moment, her hand rubbing my back in slow, calming circles. When she spoke again, her voice was full of a gentle, rational logic, the voice of a loving sister trying to talk her hysterical sibling off a ledge. Okay, she said softly. But let's think about this, Jaws. Let's not jump to the worst possible conclusion. You know how Derek is. He's a planner. He's always trying to solve things. She pulled back, her wide, sincere eyes looking into mine. Maybe, she suggested, her voice full of a beautiful, plausible hope. Maybe he was there getting some tests done on his own. You know, secretly, to spare you more pain, more appointments, more needles. Maybe he was trying to see if there was a problem on his end before he put you through another round of IVF. The idea was a small, fragile life raft in the middle of my raging sea of despair. It made a kind of sense. It fit with the narrative of Derek as a loving, protective husband. It was a comforting, noble explanation. Or, she continued, her voice gaining a new excited energy, maybe he was planning a surprise. A huge one. You know how he is with his grand gestures. Maybe he was meeting with a specialist, a new doctor, to set up some revolutionary new treatment for you as a surprise. He lied about work because he didn't want to ruin it. This idea was even better. It was a beautiful romantic fantasy, a story where my husband was not a liar but a hero, a man secretly orchestrating a miracle for the woman he loved. I clung to it, my heart aching with a desperate, foolish hope. You really think so? I whispered, my tears beginning to subside. I think it's possible, she said, squeezing my hand. Derek loves you more than anything, Jess. He would never ever hurt you. You two have the perfect marriage. There has to be a logical explanation. Don't let your mind run away with you. Just wait. Wait and see what he says in the morning. I bet he has a surprise for you that's going to make you feel so silly forever doubting him. Her words were a powerful sedative. Her calm, logical and deeply loving support was exactly what I needed to hear. She was my sister, my ally, my anchor in the storm. She was the one person in the world who understood, who could help me make sense of the senseless. We talked for another hour. She let me cry, she let me vent my fears, and with every fear she offered a gentle, plausible, and deeply comforting alternative. By the time I finally went to bed, the raw screaming panic had subsided into a low, manageable hum of anxiety. I was still hurt that he had lied, but Maya had given me a new lens through which to view the lie, not as a betrayal but as a misguided act of love. I fell into a restless sleep, my dreams a chaotic jumble of dark offices and sterile medical buildings, but underneath it all was the fragile, hopeful thread of Maya's narrative. A surprise. He was planning a surprise. I held on to that thought like a drowning woman clinging to a piece of driftwood. It was a beautiful, comforting lie. And as I would soon discover, it had been delivered by the most gifted and heartless liar of all. The next day was a limbo of quiet, agonizing uncertainty. Derek came home early in the morning, looking exhausted, his clothes rumpled. He was a perfect portrait of a man who had pulled an all-nighter for a work crisis. He was full of apologies for being so short on the phone. His story a seamless, detailed narrative of corrupted files, frantic teamwork, and a last-minute triumph just before the big presentation. It was a masterful performance. I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to believe in the loving, overworked husband and the beautiful secret surprise that Maya had planted in my mind. So I played my own part. I was the loving, supportive wife. I made him a big breakfast. I told him how proud I was of him. I did not mention the dark office. I did not mention the clinic. I did not mention the giggle. I simply waited for the grand reveal, the surprise that would make all this secrecy and pain make sense. But the day passed, and no surprise materialized. He was quiet, distant, his eyes constantly on his phone, a small secret smile playing on his lips as he texted. When I asked who he was texting, he said it was just the team, decompressing after their big win. The lie was so smooth, so easy, that it sent a fresh, cold sliver of doubt into my heart. The doubt festered all day, a low-grade infection in the fragile hope Maya had given me. That evening, as I was gathering the laundry, the first hard piece of evidence fell into my hands. Maya, for all her bohemian, free-spirited posturing, was a slob. Her beautiful, light-filled guest house was a chaotic whirlwind of clothes, art supplies and half-finished projects. I had been doing her laundry for her since she moved in, a small maternal act that was part of the web of our complicated, dependent relationship. I went into her room to collect her hamper. Clothes were strewn everywhere, a colorful explosion of her messy, creative life. As I was picking up a pair of her paint-stained jeans from the floor, something small and crumpled fell out of the back pocket. It was a pharmacy receipt. Ordinarily I would have just thrown it away. It was none of my business. But in my heightened state of suspicion, every small detail felt like a potential clue. My eyes scanned the small, flimsy piece of paper. It was from a specialty pharmacy in Buckhead, not our usual local drugstore. The date was from the day before yesterday afternoon. And then my eyes landed on the name of the medication. My breath caught in my throat. My blood ran cold. It was not an antibiotic or a painkiller. It was a box of Menopur, a powerful injectable fertility hormone. I stared at the name, my mind reeling. I knew this drug. I knew it intimately. I had injected it into my own body countless times. It was a drug used to stimulate the ovaries, a key component in the most aggressive and expensive rounds of in vitro fertilization. It was not a drug a young, healthy, single woman like Maya would be taking for any normal reason. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I had to sit down. I sank onto the edge of her messy, unmade bed, the small damning piece of paper trembling in my hand. Why was Maya taking this? Was she having her own secret fertility struggles? Was she planning to freeze her eggs? The questions were a frantic buzzing swarm in my mind, but none of the answers felt right. And then I saw the final devastating detail on the receipt. At the bottom, in small clear print, was the name of the prescribing physician, Dr. Alani Peters. The name was a gunshot in the silent, chaotic room. Dr. Peters. The Peters Fertility and Women's Wellness Clinic. The name of the clinic where my husband's car had been parked last night. The name of the place where he had lied about being, where I had heard the familiar female giggle. The pieces of the puzzle began to slam into place, not with a gentle click but with the violent tearing sound of my world being ripped apart. The clinic. The fertility drugs. The doctor's name, a single terrible thread connecting my husband's lie to my sister's secret. Maya's comforting words from the night before echoed in my mind, no longer a source of hope, but a chorus of mocking, insidious lies. He's planning a surprise. He's just getting tests done to spare you more pain. She hadn't been offering me rationalizations. She had been feeding me a script that she and my husband had clearly written together. I stood up, the receipt clutched in my fist. The fragile, hopeful woman who had been waiting for a surprise was gone, replaced by a cold, methodical investigator who had just been handed her first irrefutable piece of evidence. The time for waiting, for hoping, for trusting, was over. It was time to find the truth. And I knew, with a chilling absolute certainty, that the truth was going to be more monstrous than anything my worst nightmares could have ever conceived. The crumpled pharmacy receipt in my hand was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a key. It was the key to a door I hadn't even known existed. And I was now certain that behind that door lay a truth so monstrous it would rewrite the entire history of my life. I walked from Maya's guest house back to the main house, my movements stiff and robotic. My mind was a high-speed computer, processing the new data, running 1,000 frantic calculations. Dr. Peters' Menopur, the clinic, the giggle, the lie. The variables were all there, and they were beginning to form an equation of a betrayal so complex and so profound it was almost elegant in its cruelty. I went straight to my office and closed the door. This was my war room, my sanctuary of logic and order, and I needed its quiet, calming influence. I sat down at my desk and forced myself to breathe, to push past the rising tide of emotional panic and to think like the event planner I was. I had a problem, a complex, multi-layered and deeply personal logistical nightmare, and the only way to solve it was to gather more intelligence. I turned to my computer and began to do what I do best. I researched. I didn't just do a simple Google search for the Peters Clinic. I did a deep dive. I accessed industry databases, read medical journals, and scoured the exclusive high-end lifestyle blogs that catered to Atlanta's elite. I was building a complete, 360-degree profile of the place where my husband had spent his late night at work. The Peters Clinic, I quickly discovered, was a world-class institution. Dr. Alani Peters was a legend in the field of reproductive medicine, a pioneer with a reputation for taking on the most difficult cases and achieving miraculous results. Her clinic was a beacon of hope for the city's wealthiest and most powerful couples, a place where impossible dreams were made possible through a combination of cutting-edge science and a level of discretion that was absolute. The clinic offered a range of services: IVF, genetic testing, egg freezing, but as I dug deeper, reading between the lines of the glossy marketing materials and the glowing testimonials, I found its true specialty, the service that had put it on the national map. The Peters Clinic was famous for one thing above all else: its highly successful, deeply discreet, and astronomically expensive surrogacy program. The word surrogacy appeared on my screen, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. A cold, heavy dread, so profound it was almost a physical weight, settled in my chest. I read on, my eyes scanning the text with a kind of morbid, horrified fascination. The program was designed for an elite, international clientele. It catered to celebrities, to tech billionaires, to people for whom money was no object and for whom privacy was paramount. The clinic handled everything. They had a roster of carefully vetted, highly compensated gestational carriers. They managed all the legal contracts, the medical procedures, the financial transactions. They offered a seamless turnkey solution to creating a family, a luxury service for the 1%. I stared at the screen, at the smiling happy faces of the couples and the testimonials, at the beautiful sterile images of the clinic's state-of-the-art facilities, and I thought of the receipt in my pocket. Menopur, a powerful hormone used to prepare a woman's body for an egg retrieval cycle, a drug that would be a critical component of any surrogacy journey. The pieces were no longer just scattered on the table. They were flying together, drawn by a terrible magnetic force, forming a picture of a betrayal so cold-blooded and so twisted that it defied all reason. My husband Derek, a man who had supposedly shared my grief and my struggle with infertility for 5 years. My sister Maya, the struggling artist I had supported, housed and loved. The woman whose familiar giggle I had heard on the other end of the phone. The fertility clinic, the surrogacy program. The unthinkable, monstrous suspicion began to form in my mind. It was a thought so vile, so contrary to the laws of love and family that my brain tried to reject it. But the logic was undeniable. The evidence, though circumstantial, was building a case that was as solid and as irrefutable as a brick wall. What if my husband's surprise was not a new treatment for me? What if, tired of our shared failures, of my defective body, he had decided to take matters into his own hands? What if he had decided to build a family, but not with me? What if he had secretly hired a surrogate to carry his child? And what if that surrogate, the young, healthy woman whose body was being prepared with my money, was my own sister? The thought was a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs in a silent, agonized rush. I leaned forward, my head in my hands, as a wave of nausea and vertigo washed over me. It couldn't be true. It was too ugly. It was too cruel. It was the plot of a terrible melodramatic movie. Not the reality of my carefully planned, perfectly executed life. But the evidence was there. A quiet, damning chorus of facts. The lie about work. The secret visit to a surrogacy clinic. The fertility drugs in my sister's pocket. The familiar giggle in the background of his call. It all pointed in one terrible and unavoidable direction. My grief was no longer a quiet, sad thing. It was being consumed by a new, terrifying emotion. A cold, methodical and utterly all-consuming need to know the truth, no matter how monstrous that truth might be. The time for passive observation was over. It was time to go on the offensive. I sat in the sterile silence of my office for what felt like an eternity, the monstrous, unthinkable suspicion coiling in my gut like a venomous snake. It was a theory so grotesque, so contrary to every principle of love, loyalty and family, that a part of my mind fought desperately to reject it, but the logical, analytical part of me, the part that had made me a successful event planner, could not ignore the terrible, elegant symmetry of the evidence. Every detail, every lie, every out-of-place clue now clicked into a new horrifying alignment. Derek's lie about working late. It wasn't a clumsy last-minute fabrication. It was a necessary piece of subterfuge. An appointment at an exclusive fertility clinic, especially one concerning a matter as sensitive as surrogacy, would be a private after-hours affair. He needed a cover story, a plausible reason to be unavailable and unreachable for several hours. The work emergency was the perfect, unimpeachable excuse. The giggle, the light, musical and chillingly familiar sound I had heard in the background of his call. My mind in that initial moment of shock had recoiled from the obvious. It had been Maya's giggle. I knew her laugh as well as I knew my own. I had heard it a million times, echoing through our house, our garden, our lives. The sound had been familiar because it was the sound of my own sister, in a place she should not have been, with a man she should not have been with, in the middle of a lie he should not have been telling. The GPS location, the Peters Clinic. It wasn't a random choice. It was the best, the most exclusive, the most discreet. Derek was an architect of grand visions. He would not have settled for anything less than the absolute pinnacle of the industry for a project as important as the secret creation of his own child. The clinic's reputation for absolute privacy would have been its primary selling point. He would have felt safe there, confident that his secret was protected by a wall of money and professional discretion. And the receipt. The small, crumpled and utterly damning piece of paper. Menopur. Dr. Alani Peters. It was the physical, tangible link that connected my sister directly to my husband's lie, in the secret location. Maya wasn't just a visitor at the clinic. She was a patient. She was undergoing a complex and expensive medical procedure, a procedure that had a single, clear and terrible purpose in the context of a surrogacy program. The full, monstrous scope of the conspiracy began to take shape in my mind, a dark, twisted architectural blueprint of betrayal. Derek, my loving, supportive husband, had grown tired of our shared struggle. He had grown tired of my body's failures, and so he had decided to outsource the project. He had decided to build his family with a different set of materials, a different partner, and he had chosen my sister, my beautiful, resentful and financially dependent sister, Maya. The one woman in the world he knew he could control, both through the money we provided her and through her own deep-seated competitive desire to finally one-up her successful older sister. What greater triumph could there be for the struggling artist than to give the successful, perfect sister the one thing she could not have? To succeed where she had so profoundly failed. The deal would have been simple. He would provide the sperm, they would use a donor egg perhaps, or even my own frozen embryos from our past IVF cycles. The thought was a fresh new wave of horror that made me feel physically ill. And Maya, my sister, would provide the womb. She would be the gestational carrier, the vessel, and in exchange, I could only imagine the financial arrangement, the secret regular payments he was likely making to her, payments that would finally give her the financial independence from me that she had always so desperately craved. She wasn't just getting revenge, she was getting rich. They were building a family, his and hers, using my money, my home and my love as the scaffolding for their secret monstrous construction project. They were living under my roof, eating my food, accepting my support and my generosity, all while conspiring behind my back in the most intimate and devastating way imaginable. The grief I had felt, the simple, clean pain of a wife who suspected her husband of a common affair, was a pale, insignificant thing compared to this. This was not a simple betrayal. This was a violation of the sacred. This was a crime against the very definition of family, of love, of sisterhood. I stood up from my desk, my movements stiff, my body cold. The time for tears, for shock, for heartbroken paralysis was over. The pain was still there, a vast, black ocean of it inside me. But now, it had a purpose. It was fuel. My analytical mind, my event planner's brain, took control. I had a theory, a terrible, monstrous and entirely plausible theory. But it was still just a theory. Before I could act, before I could begin to plan my response, I needed more than just suspicion. I needed proof. I needed confirmation. I needed to hear it from an undeniable source. I needed to find a way to get inside the walls of that clinic, to access the records of their secret shared file, and I knew, with a sudden cold clarity, that my professional skills in charm, persuasion and social engineering were about to be put to their most important and most devastating use. My grief, as profound as it was, had a sharp, clarifying edge. It was the grief of a planner whose perfect years-long event has been sabotaged from the inside. The emotional response was devastation, but the professional response was a cold, methodical need to understand the full scope of the failure, to identify the saboteurs and to seize control of the narrative. I could not confront them. Not yet. A direct accusation would be met with a firestorm of gaslighting and denial. Derek would call me hysterical. Maya would cry and play the victim, accusing me of being a paranoid, controlling older sister. They would close ranks, their shared secret a fortress wall that I could not breach. I needed a key to that fortress, a piece of irrefutable proof that would leave them with no room to lie, no corner to hide in. That key was inside the Peters Clinic. I spent the rest of the day in my office, not as a grieving wife, but as a planner preparing for the most important pitch of her life. I wasn't selling a gala or a wedding. I was selling a persona. I researched the clinic's public-facing materials, their social media, the interviews Dr. Peters had given. I was studying my target, learning their language, their culture, their values. They prided themselves on being a family, on creating a warm, supportive and deeply personal journey for their clients. I would use that to my advantage. The next morning I made the call. I did not use my own name. I created a new identity. Jessica, a successful but anxious woman from out of state, just beginning to explore the daunting world of surrogacy. My voice, when I spoke to the friendly professional receptionist, was a carefully calibrated instrument of vulnerability, hope, and a touch of overwhelmed confusion. "Hi," I began, my voice a little shaky, a little hesitant. "My name is Jessica. I was hoping to get some information about your surrogacy program. It's all a bit overwhelming." The receptionist, whose name was Ashley, was wonderful. She was exactly the kind of warm, empathetic frontline employee a clinic like this would hire. She was reassuring, kind, and full of gentle encouragement. I let her talk, feeding her small prompts, making her feel like she was in control, like she was the expert guiding the nervous novice. I was building a rapport, establishing a connection, a small fragile bridge of trust. After about 10 minutes of her explaining the process, I deployed the critical line, the carefully crafted piece of bait that the entire operation depended on. "You know," I said with a small hopeful laugh, "the only reason I even have the courage to make this call is because of my sister. She and her partner are just starting the journey with you all, and she just cannot stop raving about how wonderful, how supportive, everyone at the clinic has been." "Oh, that's so lovely to hear," Ashley said, her voice full of genuine warmth. "We really do try to make it feel like a family here." "I know," I said. "She just makes it sound so seamless." I paused, as if trying to remember the name. "My sister Maya Davis. She's just had the most wonderful experience with you all." This was the moment of truth. The moment where my entire plan would either succeed or fail. I was gambling on the human element, on the ingrained desire of a helpful person in a family environment, to make a connection, to be part of a happy story. "Maya Davis," Ashley repeated, and I could hear the soft rhythmic clicking of her keyboard as she typed the name into her system. "Let me just see here." The silence stretched for an eternity. My heart was a frantic silent drum against my ribs. "Oh yes." Ashley's voice came back bright and cheerful. "Maya, of course. We all love Maya. She's just the sweetest." My breath caught in my throat. The first part of the lock had clicked open. "She and her partner, Mr. Jennings, are just the sweetest couple," Ashley continued, her voice full of the innocent, unknowing enthusiasm of a person who believes they are sharing in a happy family story. "They're going to be such wonderful parents. Mr. Jennings, my husband's name." The second part of the lock had clicked open. The confirmation was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that almost made me double over. But I had to hold on. I was so close. "I know, right?" I said, my voice a high, bright, and utterly false imitation of sisterly pride. "And the most amazing part is that I get to be a part of it. It's so beautiful." I was laying the final piece of the trap, feeding her the narrative I needed her to confirm. "Oh, I know," she gushed, completely taken in. "When I saw the file, I just thought it was the most wonderful story. You're all doing this together." She paused. The sound of more clicking. "I see you right here in their file, listed as the intended mother. That is so wonderful." And there it was. Intended mother. The final, brutal, and irrefutable confirmation. It was all true. They had used my frozen embryos. They had stolen my chance at motherhood, my genetic material, and had given it to my own sister, all behind my back. They were not just having a baby. They were having my baby. The world went silent. A high-pitched ringing started in my ears. I felt a strange, terrifying sense of detachment, as if I were floating above my own body watching a scene from a movie. The friendly, cheerful voice of the receptionist was a distant, meaningless buzz. "Jessica, are you still there?" I somehow managed to find my voice. It was a thin, reedy alien sound. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much. Ashley. You have been more helpful than you can possibly imagine." I hung up the phone. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply sat there in the quiet, sunlit sanctuary of my office, and I let the full, monstrous, and absolute truth of my husband's and my sister's betrayal wash over me. The grief was a black, fathomless ocean, but in the depths of that ocean, a new, cold, and terrible creature was beginning to stir. The time for gathering intelligence was over. The time for planning the demolition had begun. The confirmation from the clinic was not a simple piece of information. It was a detonator. It triggered an explosion in the center of my being. A blast that vaporized the last lingering vestiges of the loving wife and the trusting sister I used to be. The grief, the shock, the heartbreak. It all collapsed inward, forming a single dense and infinitely cold point of pure, unadulterated rage. But it was not a hot, chaotic rage. It was an architect's rage. It was cold, methodical, and utterly focused on a single objective: the complete and total demolition of the treacherous structure my husband and sister had built on the ruins of my trust. I was no longer a victim. I was a prosecutor, and I was about to build my case. A case built not on emotion but on the cold, hard, and irrefutable language of money. I turned back to my computer, my movements now swift, precise, and devoid of any hesitation. As the co-owner of our shared financial life, I had access to everything: the joint checking, the joint savings, the investment portfolios. Derek, in his arrogance, had always seen the finances as his domain, the world of big-picture numbers. While he relegated me to the household budget, he had no idea that I, the meticulous event planner, the woman who could track the cost of 1,000 champagne flutes down to the last cent, had always had a quiet, parallel understanding of our financial world that was far more detailed and far more intimate than his own. I started with our main joint savings account, the large, liquid fund we used for emergencies and large-scale projects. I began to scroll back through the transaction history, my eyes scanning the columns of debits and credits. A familiar mathematical landscape. I went back 6 months, then 9, then a year. And then, I found it. The first anomaly: it was a wire transfer from 10 months ago, for a large round number, $50,000. It was disguised, labeled with a vague, professional-sounding memo: architectural consulting fees, Harrison Project. It looked legitimate. It was a project Derek had been working on, but I knew with a sudden, chilling certainty that it was a lie. I kept scrolling. 2 months later, another one, $75,000. The memo was different this time. Material sourcing, Midtown Tower. Another one of his major projects. Another perfect piece of camouflage. A pattern began to emerge. Every 2 to 3 months, a massive 5 or 6-figure sum would disappear from our shared savings. Each transfer meticulously disguised as a legitimate business expense related to one of Derek's architectural projects. It was a slow, systematic, and almost invisible siphoning of our shared future. I tracked the destination account for each transfer. They all went to the same place: an account at a different bank, a bank we had never used. It was an account I had never seen before, an account I had no access to, a secret account. My breath hitched, the blood was pounding in my ears. This was the financial heart of their conspiracy. This was the slush fund, the war chest, built with my money that was funding their monstrous secret project. But how to get inside? How to see the other side of the transactions? My mind raced. Derek, for all his cleverness, had one critical weakness: his reliance on me, on my organizational skills. I was the keeper of the keys, the one who managed the dozens of passwords, the security questions, the digital infrastructure of our entire life. I had it all stored in a heavily encrypted file on my personal server. A file he knew about but had never bothered to learn how to access. He just called me whenever he forgot a password, which was often. I accessed the file. I scrolled through the long list of his digital identities, his email accounts, his social media, his frequent flyer programs, and then I found what I was looking for. A few years ago, I had helped him set up an online banking profile for his small personal checking account, the one his salary was paid into. I had the username, I had the password, and I had the answers to his security questions. What was the name of your first pet? What is your mother's maiden name? They were questions I could answer in my sleep. It was a long shot. He could have used a different password for this new secret account, but Derek was a man of habit, a man who prized convenience over security. It was worth a try. I went to the website of the new bank. I entered the account number I had found from the wire transfers. I then entered the username and password for his other known bank account. I held my breath and clicked login. For a moment, nothing happened, and then, the page loaded. I was in. I felt a surge of cold, triumphant power. I was inside his secret world. The account summary page was displayed before me. A stark digital confession. The current balance was just over $300,000. A massive secret fortune he had systematically stolen from our shared life. And then I looked at the transaction history for this account. It was the other half of the story, the complete, unvarnished truth. I saw the incoming transfers from our joint savings, the consulting fees and material sourcing funds. And I saw the outgoing payments. There they were, laid out in a neat, chronological and utterly damning list. A series of massive six-figure payments made over the past 10 months, to a single recurring payee, the Peters Clinic. The total was astronomical, enough to fund the most expensive high-end surrogacy program in the country. And then I saw the other payments. A series of smaller but still substantial regular monthly transfers. $5,000 every single month. For the past 10 months, the recipient was a simple, chilling two-letter initial and a name. Muck Davis. Maya. My sister. He was paying her $5,000 a month for her silence, for her complicity, for her womb. The full, ugly, and transactional nature of their betrayal was laid bare. This was not a crime of passion. This was a business deal, a cold, calculated, and monstrously cruel contract between my husband and my sister, written in the ink of my own money. They had conspired to steal not just my dream of a family, but the very financial foundation of my life. And they had done it all while smiling at me over the dinner table. I took a screenshot of the entire transaction history. Then another. I downloaded the statements, a complete 10-month record of their financial conspiracy. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. It was absolute. It was irrefutable. It was a weapon of mass destruction, and I was now holding the launch codes. I sat in the quiet, sterile glow of my computer screen, the downloaded bank statements a stack of digital poison on my desktop. The full monstrous blueprint of their betrayal was now complete, rendered in the cold, irrefutable language of numbers. It was an architectural drawing of a conspiracy so twisted, so intimate, and so cruel that it almost defied belief. But the evidence was absolute. This was not a simple affair. This was not a husband who had strayed, a moment of weakness, a crime of passion. This was a premeditated, long-term and financially complex project of which I was the sole unwitting investor and the primary, intended victim. Derek, my brilliant visionary husband, had looked at our 5-year struggle with infertility and had seen not a shared tragedy but a design flaw, a problem to be solved, and his solution was not to support his wife, not to explore other paths together but to outsource the project to a more efficient, more reliable contractor. He had decided to build his family, but he had written me out of the blueprints. His choice of contractor was a work of diabolical genius. My own sister Maya. She was the perfect accomplice, a woman who was a permanent fixture in our lives, whose presence would raise no suspicion. She was beautiful, young, and healthy, the perfect vessel for the child I could not carry, and she was deeply resentfully dependent on me, a dependency he had weaponized with brutal efficiency. He had offered her a deal she could not refuse. A secret steady income of $5,000 a month. A sum that would finally grant her the financial independence she had always craved. And he had offered her something more. Something far more potent. The chance to finally definitively triumph over her successful older sister. She would give him the one thing I could not. She would succeed where I had failed. It was a transaction built on the twin pillars of her greed and her resentment. A foundation as solid and as ugly as concrete. And the funding for this monstrous project, it came from me. My money. The fortune I had worked my entire life to build. The shared savings I had believed was the foundation for our future, for our family. Derek had systematically siphoned it away. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, using his knowledge of my trust and his own professional projects as a perfect, insidious camouflage. He had stolen my money to pay my sister to have my baby. The final, most monstrous detail, the confirmation from the clinic that I was listed as the intended mother, was the masterstroke of his cruelty. He had used my own frozen embryos, the last fragile remnants of my own biological hope, without my knowledge or consent. It was a theft of a magnitude I could not even begin to process. He had stolen my genetic material, my very essence, and had implanted it in the womb of my own sister. He was building a family with my DNA, but without me. It was a way to have his cake and eat it too. To have the biological child he so desperately wanted while presenting it to the world, and perhaps even to me as a miraculous, inexplicable gift. I could almost hear his planned speech. It's a miracle, Jasmine. Maya offered to do this for us. A selfless, beautiful gift. It would have been the final, perfect, and most devastating lie of all. They were a team. A conspiracy of two, operating right under my roof, in the heart of my life. Every act of generosity I had shown them, every moment of love and support had been a tool they had used against me. The guest house I provided for my sister was their secret meeting place. The financial support I gave her was the seed money for her betrayal. The trust I placed in my husband was the key that had allowed him to unlock and drain our shared life. I looked around my beautiful, quiet office, at the awards on the wall, at the framed photos of a smiling, happy couple who no longer existed. My life, my perfectly planned, beautifully executed life, was a fraud. It was a stage set, and I was the only actor who hadn't known the play was a tragedy. The grief was a physical weight, a crushing pressure on my chest. But as I sat there in the ruins of my own making, a new feeling began to emerge. It was a feeling as cold and as clean as a shard of glass. It was the architect's rage, the quiet, focused fury of a creator whose masterpiece has been willfully, maliciously defaced. They thought I was just a part of the scenery. They thought I was the soft, emotional, and slightly naive wife, the one who handled the flowers and the seating charts. They had mistaken my love for weakness, my trust for blindness. They had forgotten who I was. I was not just a planner of parties, I was an architect of realities. I had built this world they had so casually and so cruelly tried to hijack, and I was about to remind them that the architect is the only one who knows where all the load-bearing walls are. And she is the only one who knows how to bring the entire rotten structure crashing down. My heartbreak was not an ending. It was a catalyst. It was the beginning of my new final project, the design and execution of their utter and unforgettable ruin. The shift inside me was a quiet, seismic event. The weeping, heartbroken wife was gone, and in her place was the event planner, the architect, the CEO of Jasmine Events. My mind, which had been a chaotic storm of grief and betrayal, was now a calm, clear, and focused workspace. I was no longer a victim in their drama. I was the writer, the director, and the producer of a new final act, and the production was going to be a masterpiece. My entire life, my entire career, had been a training ground for this very moment. What is an event planner, after all? We are masters of illusion, creators of temporary, perfect worlds. We understand the power of lighting, of music, of a perfectly timed entrance. We understand the importance of a guest list, of a captive audience, and most of all, we understand the devastating impact of a dramatic, unforgettable reveal. My revenge would not be a messy, emotional confrontation in the kitchen. It would not be a series of angry phone calls or bitter legal letters. That was not my style. My style was precision. My style was elegance. My style was a flawless execution that left no room for error, no possibility of escape. I was going to plan their downfall with the same meticulous, obsessive attention to detail that I brought to $1 million wedding. It would be my final greatest event. The theme, a celebration of family. The irony was so sharp, so delicious, that it was the first thing that had made me truly smile in days. I opened a new file on my computer, a fresh, blank document. At the top I typed the project title, The Jennings Family, a final accounting. I began to storyboard the event, just as I would for any high-profile client. The invitation needed a plausible, compelling pretext. I couldn't just summon them to a dinner, they would be suspicious. The invitation had to be an act of love, a gesture of healing. I would frame it as a celebration of family dinner. I would tell them that after all our years of struggle, after all the pain and disappointment, I had come to a realization that we needed to stop focusing on the family we didn't have, and start celebrating the beautiful family we did have. Me, my wonderful supportive husband, and my loving generous sister. The lie was so thick with a saccharine sentimental poison that I knew they would swallow it whole. It fit their narrative of me as the emotional, slightly naive wife, and it would allay any fears they had that I might be suspicious. The guest list was the most critical element. A performance needs an audience, and for this particular performance, the audience had to be carefully curated for maximum impact. I would not invite a crowd, I would invite a small, intimate group of the people whose opinions Derek and Maya valued most in the world. My parents, whose gentle disappointment would be a quiet, devastating blow. Derek's parents, a proud, old-school couple who valued integrity and reputation above all else. And two of our oldest, closest friends, the couple who had been the best man and maid of honor at our wedding, the witnesses to the vows my husband had so casually and so completely betrayed. This would not be a trial by a jury of strangers. This would be a judgment by a jury of their peers, of the very people whose respect they had worked their entire lives to cultivate. The venue would be our own home, the place where they had lived their lie. The dining room would be exquisitely decorated, the food catered by the best chef in Atlanta, the wine rare and expensive. The atmosphere would be one of love, of celebration, of a family united. It would be a beautiful, perfect stage set for the ugly, terrible truth that was about to be revealed. And there would be one crucial prop, a large high-definition television, positioned prominently in the living room for the evening's special tribute. And of course a videographer. I would hire a professional, claiming I wanted to capture the beautiful moment as a keepsake, a family heirloom. His real job, of course, would be to capture their faces when their world came crashing down. The reveal would be the main event. The surprise video. After dinner, I would gather everyone in the living room. I would give a heartfelt, tearful speech about my love for my husband and my sister. And then, I would present my tribute, my gift to them. The video would not be a sentimental slideshow of family photos. It would be a cold, clinical, and utterly devastating presentation of facts. It would be a timeline of their betrayal, built from the evidence I had so meticulously gathered, the bank statements, the surrogacy contract, and the final brutal kill shot. The footage from the hidden nanny cam I had installed in the living room 2 days ago, a camera that had already captured them in a dozen whispered conspiratorial conversations about their baby and how to manage poor fragile Jasmine. The aftermath was simple. There would be no screaming, no arguments. The evidence would be absolute. The verdict delivered not by me, but by the silent, horrified judgment in the eyes of their parents and friends. And in that silence, I would deliver my final, quiet, and legally binding closing statement, announcing the end of my marriage, and the beginning of a massive lawsuit that would strip them of every last cent they had stolen. I sat back from my desk and looked at the blueprint I had created. It was a perfect plan. It was elegant. It was precise, and it was utterly, devastatingly cruel. It was an event from which there would be no escape, a memory that would be seared into their minds forever. The loving, forgiving wife was gone. The architect of revenge was here, and she was about to build them a beautiful, inescapable prison of their own making. The week leading up to the celebration of family dinner was one of the most difficult and surreal of my life. It required an act of emotional self-control so profound that it left me feeling hollowed out. A ghost in my own home. I had to become the ultimate performer, to play the role of the loving, unsuspecting wife with a flawless, unwavering conviction. I presented the idea for the dinner to Derek and Maya over a quiet breakfast a few days after my discovery. My voice was a carefully calibrated instrument of gentle, hopeful emotion. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I began, my eyes soft, my smile a little fragile, about us, about all the stress and the sadness of the past few years. And I've realized, I've been so focused on what we don't have that I haven't been properly grateful for what we do. We have each other, we have this beautiful life, and I want to celebrate that. I want to have a special dinner, just for us and for the people who love us most. Derek looked at me, his expression a mixture of surprise and a dawning, patronizing pity. He saw a wife who was finally capitulating, who was giving up on the dream of a child and was now settling for the life she had. "Jace, that's a wonderful idea," he said, his voice full of a warm, false sincerity. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I think that's exactly what we need." Maya, my sister, the actress, was even better. Her eyes filled with perfectly formed, sympathetic tears. "Oh, Jazz," she whispered, her voice thick with a beautifully feigned emotion. "That is the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. Of course we should celebrate. We have so much to be thankful for." The hook was set. They had not just agreed to the dinner, they had embraced it. They saw it as a sign of their own success, a confirmation that I was emotionally stable, that I was not suspicious, that their secret was safe. Their relief was a palpable, disgusting thing. From that moment on, I moved with a quiet, focused purpose, a planner in her element. I made the calls. I invited our parents, our closest friends. The story I gave them was the same one I had given Derek and Maya. It was a spontaneous celebration of love and family. They were all delighted. I hired the caterer, one of the best in Atlanta, a man I had worked with for years. I selected a menu of breathtaking, extravagant dishes. Oysters, filet mignon, lobster tails. I chose the wines, rare and expensive vintages from my personal cellar. The stage had to be perfect. The illusion of a lavish, no-expense-spared celebration absolute. My final and most critical booking was the videographer. I found a young, discreet professional and explained the brief. "I want you to capture everything," I told him, my voice all business. "The laughter, the toasts, the emotions, but your primary focus, when the video tribute begins, will be on my husband and my sister. I want tight, clear shots of their reactions. That is your most important job." He was a professional. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and quoted me his rate. The day of the dinner I was a whirlwind of calm, efficient activity. I oversaw the flower arrangements, the table settings, the lighting. Every detail was perfect. Every element designed to create an atmosphere of warm, intimate, and deeply deceptive love. Derek and Maya watched me, their expressions a mixture of admiration and a kind of smug, pitying indulgence. They saw a woman pouring all her frustrated maternal and creative energy into a simple dinner party. They thought it was cute. They had no idea they were watching the meticulous final preparations for their own public execution. As the guests began to arrive, the performance kicked into high gear. I was the perfect hostess, greeting everyone with warm hugs and a radiant, beaming smile. Derek was the perfect host, his charm on full display as he poured champagne and told amusing anecdotes. And Maya, my loving, supportive sister, floated through the room, a beautiful bohemian ghost, her smile as sweet and as poisonous as cyanide. We were a picture-perfect family, the very image of love and success. Our parents were beaming, our friends were laughing. The atmosphere in the house was one of pure, unadulterated joy. It was a beautiful, magnificent, and utterly fraudulent lie, and as I raised my glass for the opening toast, my eyes meeting my husband's and my sister's over the rim, I felt a surge of cold, clean, and righteous power. The overture was over, the stage was set, the audience was seated. It was time for the main event to begin. The dinner was a symphony of deception. Every bite of the exquisite food, every sip of the rare wine was laced with the bitter, unspoken truth of the evening. I watched my husband and my sister as they laughed, as they accepted the warm, loving praise of our parents and friends. They were brilliant actors, both of them. They spoke of their love for me, of their gratitude for my support, of the unbreakable bond of our family. Each word was a perfectly delivered line in a play of their own making. And I, the director of this final terrible act, let them perform, let them dig their own graves, a little deeper with every false sentiment. After the last of the decadent chocolate lava cakes had been cleared away, I knew it was time. I stood up, tapping my glass gently with a spoon, a gesture that immediately silenced the happy wine-fueled chatter. If I could have everyone's attention, I began, my voice a little thick, a little shaky. The emotion was not entirely feigned. The grief was real. But I was now using it as a prop. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. This means the world to me. I turned my gaze to Derek and then to Maya, who were seated next to each other across the table, a perfect united front of betrayal. Most of all, I continued, letting a single well-rehearsed tear trace a path down my cheek. I want to thank these two, my incredible husband, and my beautiful loving sister. I saw my mother dab her eyes with a napkin. Derek's father beamed with pride. The performance was working perfectly. The last few years they haven't been easy, I said, my voice cracking with a carefully modulated pain. But through it all their support, their love has been my rock, and I wanted to do something special tonight, to show them just how much they mean to me. I gestured toward the living room, where the large dark screen of the television dominated the wall. If everyone would join me in the living room, I said, my voice now bright with a false, excited energy. I've put together a little surprise, a tribute. There was a murmur of delighted anticipation as everyone rose and moved to the comfortable sofas and armchairs of the living room. Derek and Maya sat together on the central love seat, a perfect photogenic couple. He put his arm around her, a casual, familiar gesture that now looked monstrously incestuous to me. They looked at me with expressions of smug, indulgent affection. They were ready to be celebrated. The videographer, my quiet professional accomplice, gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. He was in position, his camera focused tightly on their two beautiful, treacherous faces. Okay, I said, taking a deep breath. Here we go. I pressed the play button on the remote. The lights in the room dimmed automatically, a piece of theatrical staging I had programmed that morning. The large screen flickered to life. But the image that appeared was not a sentimental photo of our wedding day. It was the cold, hard black and white text of a bank statement. A statement for a secret account in the name of Derek A. Jennings. A confused silence fell over the room. Derek and Maya, who had been smiling in anticipation, now stared at the screen, their smiles frozen, their expressions shifting from indulgence to utter, slack-jawed confusion. On the screen, a red line appeared, highlighting the first of the large siphoned transfers from our joint savings account. The audio, my own voice calm and clear, began to play over the speakers. The story begins 10 months ago, my recorded voice narrated. with the first of many secret transfers disguised as architectural consulting fees. The screen changed. It now showed a timeline, a relentless chronological progression of the stolen funds, each transfer highlighted, the total growing at the bottom of the screen. The color began to drain from Derek's face. Maya's hand flew to her mouth. The funds, my voice continued, as cold and as clinical as a coroner's report, were used for two primary purposes. The first, a series of six-figure payments to the Peters Fertility and Women's Wellness Clinic. The clinic's glossy logo appeared on the screen. I heard my mother-in-law let out a small confused gasp. And, the second, my voice went on, utterly merciless, was a series of regular monthly $5,000 payments to a Miss M. Davis. Maya's name and the total amount she had been paid appeared on the screen in a large damning font. She made a small strangled sound, a dying animal's cry. The screen changed again. It was now a high-resolution, scanned image of the surrogacy contract. The camera zoomed in on the key phrases: Derek Jennings, intended father, Maya Davis, gestational carrier, and the most devastating line of all, source of embryos, pre-existing, cryopreserved from IVF cycle SOM4 Jasmine and Derek Jennings. A wave of pure horrified shock went through the room. My father, a quiet gentleman, let out a low guttural sound of pure disbelieving rage. Derek's mother began to openly weep. But the final brutal and most unforgivable piece of evidence was yet to come. The screen went black for a moment, and then a new image appeared. It was grainy, shot in the low light of a hidden camera. It was the footage from the nanny cam I had placed in our own living room. The image was of Derek and Maya standing in this very room, just 2 nights ago. Their voices, captured by the hidden microphone, were crystal clear. "We just have to be careful for a few more weeks," Derek was whispering, his hand resting proprietarily on Maya's still flat stomach. "Once you're safely in the second trimester, we can tell her. We'll frame it as a gift, a miracle. She'll be so grateful, she won't even think to ask questions." "And the money?" Maya's voice asked, sharp and businesslike. "You're sure it's all secure?" "It's secure," Derek had replied, his voice a low, confident murmur. "She doesn't suspect a thing." The video ended. The screen went black, and in the dead, absolute and horrified silence of the room, the only sound was the quiet professional whir of the videographer's camera, capturing the complete and total demolition of 2 beautiful, treacherous lives. The silence that followed the video was a physical thing, a heavy, suffocating blanket of pure, unadulterated horror. The air in my beautiful, warm living room had become thin and cold, the atmosphere of a tomb. The faces of our parents, of our closest friends, were a gallery of shock, disgust, and a deep, profound, and soul-crushing disappointment. My mother, a woman of unshakable faith and fierce moral clarity, was staring at Maya, her own daughter, with an expression of such absolute heartbroken revulsion that it was more damning than any scream. My father, his face a thunderous mask of rage, looked like he was physically restraining himself from lunging at my husband. Derek's parents were a portrait of shattered pride. His father, a stern, old-school man who valued his family's reputation above all else, was looking at his son as if he were a complete and utter stranger, a monstrous changeling who had somehow taken the place of the boy he had raised. His mother was openly weeping, her body shaking with the force of her shame and sorrow. But my focus was on them, on Derek and Maya. They were frozen on the love seat, 2 beautiful, perfect statues of guilt and terror. The color had drained so completely from their faces that they looked like wax figures. They were not looking at me, they were not looking at their parents, they were staring at the blank, black screen of the television as if hoping it might somehow rewind time, might undo the catastrophic public unmasking they had just endured. The videographer, my silent, professional angel of death, continued to film, his lens a cold, unblinking eye capturing every nuance of their ruin. This was the footage I would need. This was the irrefutable record of their silent, stunned confession. Into that dead, absolute silence I stood up. My movements were calm, deliberate, and imbued with a quiet, regal authority. I was no longer the grieving wife. I was the judge, and I was about to deliver the final sentence. "I believe," I began, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room, "that the evidence speaks for itself." I looked at Derek, at my husband, the man whose vows I had held sacred for 12 years. "Our marriage," I said, the words simple, clean, and final, "is over." I then turned to my sister, the girl I had protected, nurtured, and supported her entire life. "And our sisterhood," I said, my voice now laced with a cold hard and unforgiving finality, is a casualty of your own greed. You are no longer welcome in my home. You are no longer a part of my life. Maya let out a low, wounded, animalistic cry, a sound of pure pathetic self-pity. But I was not finished. This is not just a personal betrayal, I continued, my voice gaining a new, sharp and businesslike edge. This is also a matter of significant calculated fraud. I walked over to the small desk in the corner of the room, and picked up a leather-bound portfolio. My lawyers, I said, the word a beautiful, powerful, and terrifying weapon, have been very busy this week. They have already drawn up the divorce papers, citing financial fraud and infidelity. They have also, as of this afternoon, filed a civil suit against you, Derek, for the recovery of every last cent you stole from our shared accounts. And they have filed a separate suit against you, Maya, for the recovery of the hundreds of thousands of dollars you were paid under what my lawyers have termed a fraudulent and criminally coercive contract. The legal terms, the cold hard language of consequences, were a series of final brutal blows. This was not just a family drama. This was a crime, and there would be a reckoning. You have 24 hours to vacate my guest house, Maya, I said, my voice utterly devoid of emotion. And you, Derek, will be hearing from my legal team in the morning with instructions on how to remove your personal effects from this house. I looked around at the stunned, horrified faces of my family and friends. I am so deeply sorry, I said, and the apology was genuine. I am sorry that my trust in these two people has led to an evening of such profound and ugly truth. This was supposed to be a celebration of family, and I suppose in a way it is. It is a celebration of the real family, the ones who value love, honor and integrity, and it is a final, definitive farewell to those who do not. And with that, I turned to the two broken, weeping figures on my love seat. Get out, I said. The words were not a shout, they were a quiet, calm and utterly non-negotiable command. Get out of my house, now. For a moment they didn't move. And then, prodded by the sheer burning force of the collective shame and disgust in the room, they stumbled to their feet. They did not look at anyone, they simply walked, heads bowed, a pathetic, defeated procession of two, out of the living room, out of the foyer, and out the front door into the dark, unwelcoming night. The door closed behind them with a soft, final click. The execution was complete. The weeks that followed the celebration of family dinner were a quiet, methodical and deeply cleansing process of demolition and reconstruction. The first act was to change the locks on my house. It was a simple physical act, but it was imbued with a profound symbolic power. It was a reclaiming of my space, a re-establishment of my boundaries. My home was no longer a stage for their lies. It was my sanctuary once again. The legal battles were swift and brutal. Faced with the irrefutable evidence of the bank statements, the surrogacy contract and the damning video, Derek and Maya had no defense. Their parents, horrified and deeply ashamed, did not fund their legal fight. They were on their own, and they were utterly outmatched. My lawyers were merciless. Derek, to avoid criminal charges for fraud, was forced to sign a divorce settlement that was a complete and total capitulation. He walked away with nothing but his own personal effects and a mountain of debt. The civil suit against Maya was equally successful. A judge placed a lien on all her assets and future earnings until the fees she had been paid for her services were returned in full. Their lives, as they had known them, were in absolute ruins. Their reputations among their friends and family were shredded. Their financial futures were a barren wasteland. I heard through the grapevine that they had moved into a small rented apartment on the other side of town, two disgraced co-conspirators trapped in a cage of their own making. The news brought me no joy, only a quiet, grim sense of justice served. And then, there was the final, most complex and most painful piece of the puzzle, the embryo. My embryo. My potential child, now growing inside the womb of my estranged and disgraced sister. My lawyers informed me that the legal situation was a quagmire. A tangled, unprecedented mess of familial and reproductive law. The surrogacy contract was fraudulent, but the pregnancy was a biological fact. A week after the dinner, I received a hand-delivered letter from Maya. It was a rambling, tear-stained and deeply self-pitying plea for forgiveness and for financial help. She wrote of her fears, of her confusion, of how Derek had manipulated her, but nowhere in the 5-page letter did she mention the baby as a person. She referred to it as the pregnancy, the situation, a problem that was complicating her life. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I was an architect of realities, and I would construct a new one. I had my lawyers draft a new, ironclad contract. I would not sue her for the money she owed me. I would in fact provide her with a generous living stipend for the remainder of her pregnancy, and cover all her medical bills. I would in essence fulfill the financial terms of the contract she had so treacherously entered into. In exchange, upon the birth of the child, she would relinquish all parental rights completely and irrevocably. I would be the sole legal parent. It was a cold, transactional and deeply pragmatic solution to a messy, emotional problem. She was, in the end, nothing more than a gestational carrier, a role she had chosen for herself. I was simply formalizing it. She signed the papers without hesitation. For her it was a bailout, an escape from the financial ruin she was facing. For me it was the reclamation of my child. The months that followed were a strange, quiet period of waiting. I poured myself into my work, my focus and creativity sharper than ever before. I was no longer a woman defined by a sense of lack, by a painful, empty space in her life. I was a woman on the verge of a new, profound, and deeply intentional beginning. And then one cool spring morning I got a call from my own fertility clinic. The clinic where Derek and I had spent so many years, so much hope. It was a nurse I had known for a long time. "Mrs. Jennings," she said, her voice gentle and familiar. "We were just doing our annual audit of the cryo storage, and I just wanted to confirm your intentions. You still have one healthy, viable frozen embryo from your last IVF cycle with us." I stood in my pristine, quiet office, the morning sun streaming through the windows, and I smiled. The world, which had been a chaotic, unpredictable storm, was suddenly a place of infinite, beautiful possibility. My future was not tied to the child my sister was carrying. That was a reclamation of my past. My future was still a blank page. "Actually, yes," I said, my voice clear and full of a new, joyful energy. I looked at the blank, open calendar on my desk, a canvas of endless open days. "Let's schedule an appointment to discuss a transfer." I was an event planner, and I was about to plan the greatest event of all. Not a wedding, not a gala, but a birth. My birth. The birth of my child, into a life that was finally, completely and gloriously my own. Thanks for watching.